Hi, welcome back to Understanding Depression. Thank you for tuning in today. And if you find this podcast helpful, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share so we can keep the conversation going and reach even more people who might need this. Let me start with a simple but powerful question. Is depression something you're born with? Maybe you've asked this before, especially if someone in your family has struggled with depression. Maybe a parent, a sibling, or even a grandparent. You might wonder, does this mean I'm going to experience it too? This question isn't just curiosity, it's about understanding ourselves, our loved ones, and what we might carry without realizing it. In this episode, we'll dive deep into the science of genetics and how it connects, or doesn't connect, with depression. But more importantly, we'll explore how knowledge can empower us, not define us. Because here's something important to remember. Even if depression runs in the family, it doesn't mean your future is already written. Genes might influence vulnerability, but they're only part of the story. So, grab a warm drink or settle into a quiet space. Let's take this journey together, gently, honestly, and with an open mind. To really understand whether depression is inherited, we need to first get a basic grasp of what genetics actually is. Think of your DNA like a massive instruction manual, one that your body uses to build and maintain itself. This manual is made up of genes, which are like individual instructions written in a special code. These genes are passed down from your parents, half from your mother, half from your father. Some genes influence things like your eye color or how tall you might be. Others are involved in much more complex things, like how your brain functions, how your body reacts to stress, and how your mood is regulated. Now, here's the key point. Depression is what scientists call a multifactorial condition. That means it's not caused by one single gene, like in some genetic diseases. Instead, it's influenced by a combination of many genes plus your environment, things like childhood experiences, stress levels, relationships, trauma, and even your diet and sleep. So while your genes can make you more susceptible to depression, they don't guarantee you'll experience it. Think of it this way. Having a genetic predisposition is like being born with dry grass in your backyard. It doesn't mean there will definitely be a fire, but if the conditions are right, a spark can turn into a flame. On the other hand, if the grass is well watered and cared for, that fire might never happen. That's why understanding your genetic background is helpful, not to predict your fate, but to be more aware, more prepared, and more compassionate toward yourself and others. Let's now dig into the science, because researchers have been asking the same questions we're exploring today. Over the past few decades, scientists have studied thousands of families, identical twins, and even mapped out genomes to understand how much genetics contributes to depression. The findings? They're both fascinating and nuanced. One of the strongest pieces of evidence comes from twin studies. Identical twins share 100% of their DNA, while fraternal twins share about 50%, just like regular siblings. When researchers compared how often both identical twins experience depression versus fraternal twins, they found something striking. If one identical twin has depression, the other has a 40% to 50% chance of also developing it. For fraternal twins, that number drops to around 20% to 30%. That's significant. It tells us that genetics do play a role. But here's what's equally important. Even in identical twins, there's no 100% certainty. That means environment, lifestyle, and personal experience all have massive influence. Then there's the Genome-Wide Association Studies, or GWAS. These studies look at tiny variations across the entire human genome to find patterns linked to depression. So far, researchers have identified dozens of genes that appear to be involved, but each gene contributes just a small amount. It's not one depression gene, it's a complex web of genetic factors interacting with your life experience, So, in simple terms, genetics can increase your risk, but it doesn't decide your future. And that's incredibly empowering. It means we're not helpless. It means there are things we can do to support our mental health, even if we have a family history of depression. In the next part, we'll explore more about how environment and genetics interact, because this is where things get really interesting. Here's where things get deeper and more hopeful. You've probably heard the phrase nature versus nurture, right? It's the classic debate about what shapes us more, our genetic blueprint, nature, or our life experiences, nurture. But when it comes to mental health, especially depression, it's not an either-or situation. It's both, and they interact in powerful ways. Let's imagine a person has a genetic predisposition to depression. That's like having a sensitive alarm system wired into the brain. It's not a problem in itself, but it might go off more easily when triggered by stress, trauma, or prolonged difficulties. Now imagine that person grows up in a warm, stable, and supportive environment. They're taught healthy coping skills, surrounded by understanding relationships, and get early help when things feel overwhelming. That sensitive system? It might never set off a crisis. In fact, it might even make them more empathetic, more self-aware. But flip the scenario. Imagine that same person with the same genes grows up in a chaotic home, experiences neglect, or survives a traumatic event. The risk increases, not because of the genes alone, but because the environment activates those vulnerabilities. This interaction is what scientists call gene-environment interplay, and it means that no one is doomed by their DNA. Your experiences, choices, and support systems matter a lot. And here's something powerful. Positive environments can actually protect you even if you're genetically at risk. Therapy, connection, physical health, meaningful work, and even practicing gratitude or mindfulness. All of these can help rewire how your brain responds to stress. So if you've ever thought, this is just how I am because of my family, remember, biology may load the gun, but environment pulls, or doesn't pull the trigger. You have more influence than you think. If someone in your immediate family, like a parent or a sibling, has experienced depression, you might feel a sense of fear or inevitability. That's completely understandable. But let's unpack what the science actually says. Studies have shown that if a parent has had depression, their child's risk of developing depression increases. Specifically, research estimates that children of depressed parents are about 3 times more likely to experience depression than children whose parents have no history of the condition. Why is that? Part of it is genetics, yes, but it's not just about the DNA you inherit. It's also about what you learn and absorb growing up. If a child watches a parent struggle with emotional regulation, withdrawal, or chronic sadness, they may internalize certain patterns. Maybe they grow up in an environment where mental health isn't openly discussed, or where emotional needs are unintentionally unmet. Siblings, too, share both genetic and environmental influences. If one sibling develops depression, the risk for the others may increase slightly, especially if they also go through similar stressful or traumatic experiences. But here's something hopeful. Not everyone with a family history of depression ends up with it. In fact, many don't. Why? Because protective factors can make a big difference. These include a strong support network, access to mental health education, early intervention if symptoms arise, healthy coping strategies learned through therapy or self-care practices, positive role models, and emotionally safe relationships. It's not about living in fear of your family history. It's about using that knowledge as a guide. If you know you might be more vulnerable, that awareness gives you power. Power to prepare, to check in with yourself more often, and to reach out when something doesn't feel right. You're not bound by your family's story, you're writing your own. One of the biggest myths we often hear is this: there must be a depression gene, like some hidden switch in your body that just flips one day, and suddenly you're depressed. But science paints a very different picture. There is no single depression gene. Depression is not like a disease such as cystic fibrosis or Huntington's disease, where one specific gene mutation can cause the condition. Instead, depression is what we call a polygenic disorder, which means that many different genes, each with a tiny effect, contribute to the overall risk. Imagine a big puzzle made up of hundreds of tiny pieces. No single piece gives you the full picture, but together they can shape a general tendency. That's how genetic risk for depression works. Some genes might affect how your brain processes serotonin. Others might influence how sensitive you are to stress or how your immune system functions under pressure. So, what about genetic testing? Can a DNA test tell you if you'll get depression? At this point in time, the answer is not really. While researchers are working hard on developing genetic tests that could one day help us understand mental health risks better, current technology isn't precise enough. You might be able to get a general polygenic risk score, but it won't tell you for sure whether you'll develop depression, or when or why. That's because genes are only part of the equation. Life experiences, emotional resilience, trauma, culture, and even social systems all play huge roles. It's also important to remember that genetic knowledge should empower, not limit you. Your DNA isn't your destiny. It's just one part of the story, and you still get to choose how you care for yourself, how you seek support, and how you respond to the challenges you face. In fact, knowing that you might be more vulnerable can be a gift, because it gives you a reason to take your mental health seriously early on. So far, we've talked about how genes may influence the risk of developing depression. But here's another fascinating question. Do our genes also affect how we respond to treatment? The answer is yes, they might. This is where the field of pharmacogenetics comes into play. It's a branch of science that studies how a person's genetic makeup can influence their reaction to medications, including antidepressants. For example, some people metabolize medications very quickly, meaning a standard dose might leave their system too fast to be effective. Others process medications more slowly, which could increase side effects or even lead to toxicity at normal doses. These variations are often influenced by differences in genes related to liver enzymes, especially a family of genes known as CYP450. Because of this, some doctors and psychiatrists now use pharmacogenetic testing to guide medication choices, especially in cases where someone has tried multiple medications with limited success. But there's a big but. This field is still evolving. While these tests can offer helpful clues, they aren't crystal balls. They can't definitively say which medication will work for you or guarantee you'll avoid side effects. They're tools, not final answers. Beyond medication, genes may also play a role in how someone responds to psychotherapy. Some people seem to benefit more from talk therapy like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, while others might respond better to more body-based or trauma-informed approaches. And although the genetics of therapy response are less understood than those of medication, researchers believe there may be underlying biological differences in how people process emotional experiences and regulate stress. Still, here's the empowering truth. The best approach to treatment often comes from trial, patience, and partnership between you and a mental health professional who really listens. Whether or not genetics influence your journey, your willingness to explore what works for you is incredibly powerful. And remember, needing to try a few options before finding the right fit is normal. It doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. Let's take a pause from the science and hear what this looks like in real life. Meet Dina. She's 32, works as a school counselor, and comes from a family where both her mother and grandfather experienced severe depression. As a teenager, Dina lived in a home where silence often replaced emotional connection. Her mother, though loving, spent long stretches in bed, withdrawn and unreachable. For years, Dina feared she was destined to fall into the same darkness. But here's what happened. Instead of waiting for signs to appear, Dina got proactive. In college, she started therapy, not because she felt broken, but because she wanted to understand herself better. She learned emotional regulation, how to spot her own warning signs, and how to speak openly about feelings, something her family had never done. Has Dina struggled at times? Absolutely. But she's also built a life of awareness and self-kindness. She knows her risk, but she doesn't let it define her. Now meet Rio, a 28-year-old graphic designer. He has no known family history of mental illness, but found himself spiraling into a deep depression after the sudden loss of his best friend. For Rio, there was no obvious genetic explanation, but his environment delivered a trauma he wasn't emotionally prepared to handle. This is why stories matter, because depression doesn't only follow bloodlines, and having a family history doesn't mean it's a certainty. Every story is different, every brain is different, and everyone deserves support, whether your depression has a clear cause, no cause, or a mix of many. So if you see yourself in Dina, Rio, or someone else entirely, know this: awareness is strength. Seeking help is brave. And your past, whether written in DNA or in memory, doesn't have to dictate your future. So what can we do if we know we're at higher risk for depression because of family history, genetics, or a mix of both? The answer is a lot. Resilience isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something you can build, like a muscle. And the earlier we start nurturing it, the better we become at navigating emotional storms, regardless of what our genes say. Here are some evidence-based ways to strengthen your mental resilience. 1. Know your triggers and early warning signs. Self-awareness is powerful. Do you tend to spiral when you're overwhelmed at work? Does winter bring low moods? Do you isolate when you're stressed? Recognizing your own patterns helps you act before things escalate. Create consistent routines. Our brains love rhythm. Regular sleep, balanced meals, movement, even if it's just walking, can do wonders for mental stability. A solid routine can buffer your mind against chaos. Build supportive relationships, whether it's family, friends, a therapist, or a peer group. Being able to talk honestly with someone you trust can act as a psychological safety net. Social connection isn't a luxury, it's a survival tool. Practice mindfulness and self-compassion. Meditation, journaling, deep breathing. They might seem small, but over time, they reshape how your brain responds to stress. Self-compassion, especially, teaches you to treat yourself with the same kindness you'd give a friend. Seek help early. You don't have to wait until you're in crisis. If you notice persistent sadness, fatigue, or withdrawal, reach out. The earlier you intervene, the better the outcome tends to be. Educate yourself. Understanding depression helps demystify it. The more you learn, the less power stigma and fear hold over you. Podcasts like this, books, therapy. These are tools for taking control of your mental narrative. And remember, having a genetic predisposition isn't a diagnosis. It's simply information. And information gives you choices. You're not at war with your biology. You're learning to work with it, with curiosity, with compassion, and with courage. Let's take a moment to breathe. We've journeyed through the science of genetics, explored real-life stories, and looked at how both biology and environment weave together to shape our mental health. And maybe along the way, you started to see something clearly. You are not just a product of your DNA. You are a person with agency, with choices, and with the ability to shape how your story unfolds. Yes, your genes might nudge you in certain directions, but they don't hold the pen. You do. So if you come from a family where mental illness was hidden or misunderstood, you can be the generation that starts the conversation. If you've seen patterns of silence or suffering, you can be the one who says, "We deserve more." We deserve healing. If you're carrying fear about what your genes mean for your future, know that fear can be transformed into fuel for awareness, for resilience, for connection. And if you're supporting someone who lives with depression, your presence matters more than you know. You're helping rewrite the belief that we have to go through this alone, because we don't. Let's keep learning. Let's keep talking. Let's keep breaking the silence around mental health and genetics, so we can replace fear with understanding, shame with empathy, and stigma with support. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this episode. If this brought you clarity, comfort, or even just a new perspective, please share it with someone you care about. Like, comment, subscribe, and help us build a space where knowledge and compassion walk hand in hand. And most importantly, you are not broken. You are not doomed. You are human, and that's powerful. Until next time, take care of your mind, your heart, and each other.